I hope people can hear me. Are you able to hear me, everybody? I hope. I want to welcome everybody this morning. I'm going to type a really quick question to everybody. Hopefully everyone can hear me. Fantastic. So we've got one. Good morning, everybody. Good morning to everyone in the Western Hemisphere. I guess good afternoon or good evening, depending on where some of you are. My name is Joe Merrill. I am the CFO of Linden Education, and we are we represent a consortium of universities. We have a fantastic group of schools. If you've never heard of the Boutique University Consortium, we've got schools in Geneva, London, Boston, Washington, D.C., Phoenix, Albuquerque, and San Diego, California. This group of universities, we recruit international students to come and to attend our schools. And today we're going to be offering this webinar on the use of visa process. It's nice to meet all of you who have dialed in. I know it's, for some of you, a really crazy time of night, so hopefully we'll make it worthwhile. When we're done with the presentation, we'll open it up for questions. And so if you can hold your questions, you can type them in the chat line when we're done, and we'll try to get all the questions answered when we finish today. This is going to, our discussion today is on the U.S. visa process, and the U.S. visa process in general. I know that there are country-specific rules that vary by country, and we're not really going to be getting into that per se, but on the general process of the U.S. visa. If I could, I'd tell you a little bit about myself. I am a former U.S. diplomat. I was a vice consul and did consular work in Seoul, South Korea. I also had other postings. I had postings in Nigeria, Bosnia, and Washington, D.C. So any of you guys in Eastern Europe or in West Africa, hello. And I really I love all the places that I was able to go and to serve as a Foreign Service officer. So let's start off talking a little bit about what we're going to be doing today. In this webinar, we're going to be covering the qualifications for a U.S. visa. We're going to be talking about 214B, which is the biggest category that students, when they are refused. Students 99% of the time are refused under Section 214B. And we're going to spend most of the time about interview tips, things that you need to do in order to be successful in your interview. First off, let me ask you guys, and you can answer on the chat line, how many students, I guess, what percentage of students are refused when they apply for a student visa? Just what's your guess? So first time student visa applicant refusal rate, what do you think it is? You can type your guess. Maybe you think it's 100% get refused. Maybe you think it's only 5% that get refused. How many students do you think are refused when they apply for a visa for the first time? All right, we have any guesses? 60 to 65% get refused. 3% get refused. 60 to 65% for India. 3% pop. So any other guesses? It's like going really slow there. Well, 77, yes, someone looked ahead to the next slide, but 77 is actually the approval rate. It is 77%. The F1 visa approval rate globally is 77%. Now, some people will say, well, in my country it's a little bit higher, in my country it's a little bit lower. The reality is that it really doesn't vary that much from this 77%. In high fraud countries like India, the approval rate may only be around 70%. But that's the approval rate. That's not the refusal rate. And so the actual refusal rate is somewhere around 23%. It's really quite low. And there's this perception that it's impossible to get a U.S. student visa, and that's just not the truth. People tend to really freak people out about getting their visas. And the first thing you got to tell your students is just to relax, because 3 out of every 4 applicants will get a visa. And so just relax. Robbie, I actually have a friend who's in Nepal, and the visa approval rate is closer to 77%. I know it seems like it's about 50%, but what you probably aren't seeing is there's a large number of really good applicants, and you know, so it just this really doesn't vary a whole lot. And I will say with a couple of exceptions. There are some countries like Nigeria where the visa refusal rate is actually much higher. Those are the big 5 fraud countries. That's Haiti, the Dominican Republic, Nigeria, students that are trying to come from countries like North Korea, things like that. But that's definitely not Nepal or Sri Lanka or India. They're just not in that category. Okay, so now that we know, and I think I'm hopefully have established that there's a powerful myth that everybody gets refused when in fact they don't. Let's talk a little bit about the requirements for a visa. In order for you to qualify to have a student visa, you must have a residence abroad. That's defined as having compelling, strong ties that will compel you to return to your country after you complete your studies. U.S. student visa is a non-immigrant visa. And I'm going to type this in the chat line because I want to emphasize this. The U.S. student visa is a non-immigrant visa. What that means, the U.S. student visa is a non-immigrant visa. It means that if your intention when you get a student visa is to go to the United States and work and live permanently, you are not qualified. A person who receives a U.S. student visa has to intend to return back to their home country. This is very important. This is the #1 reason why students get refused, is that they're unable to establish that they have a residence abroad that they want to come back to. Secondly, they need to be accepted at an approved institution with a full course of study. What does that mean? Only certain schools have the requisite accreditation to allow international students to come and study. Those schools will be able to issue to the student an I-20. The I-20 tells you that the U.S. Department of Homeland Security has already visited and inspected the school. They have verified that they are fully accredited for the program of study at that school, and that it's a legitimate school where actual instruction is taking place. So then the student only has to maintain a full workload of study. Depending on if the school uses a semester system or a quarter system, this could be anywhere from 10 to 13 credits. It really just depends on the type of school and the type of seat hours required per credit. Finally, the student must demonstrate that they have sufficient funds to cover the first year of study and access to sufficient funds for subsequent years. This is something that I think people don't understand and it can be very confusing. The easiest way to say this is that when you go to apply for your visa, you have to show enough money in the bank for your first year of study and enough money for the following years, either in income to continue to be able to pay for it or savings. So if you look on the I-20, you'll see that there's a dollar amount for tuition and books and health insurance and living expenses with the total estimated cost of study. That total estimated cost of study on the I-20, that's what the consular officer, when they do the visa interview, they're looking to see that you have that money. They're also going to look at your income to see if you have enough income in your family to be able to support your studies after that first year. So let's say a family has total annual income of about 50,000 US dollars. And then let's say that a student is going to the United States to study at a school that costs $50,000 a year for tuition. It's not reasonable to believe that that family will spend 100% of their income to support that student on their tuition. So the consular officer will look at their savings and see if they have enough money saved to pay for the full program of study. That could be 2 years for a master's degree or 4 years for an undergraduate degree. If they don't see that the family has enough money in savings and their annual income is not sufficient, then they do not believe the student is a legitimate student because they can't afford to go study in the United States. Sometimes that's where students get tripped up. All right, 214B, the dreaded 214B. For those of you who have been helping students for a long time, you know 214B. The student comes back, they have a form letter that was handed to them under the window that says they were considered a prospective immigrant and that the consular officer believes that it was their intention to try to go study in the United States. Well, that's what we were talking about the first visa qualification. 214B is when the person believes that it is not your intention to just go and study. You intend to go and live in the United States. This is going to be, for your 214B, this is where you have to, to really be able to answer some really important questions. Now, Robbie says the embassy in Nepal wants students to don't bring any other documents. Robbie, that's to you. Other embassies may have different requirements. So, and you bring up a good point, Robbie, and that is, how do you overcome 214B? The way that you overcome 214B is you really need to be good at doing the visa interview. Now, how can you do a visa interview well? Well, here's my advice. The first one is be yourself. Okay, be yourself. What does that mean? Well, people sometimes come in and they apply for a student visa and they're trying to pretend to be someone they're not. They have, I guess, in their mind, this belief that they need to behave a certain way in order to get their visa. And that's just not true. The second bullet is related to the first, and that's know your story. The consular officer is going to ask every student, why do you want to go study at this university? I'm going to give you an example. Why would somebody want to go study at United States University? That's one of our schools. It's in San Diego, California. It's a very nice school, but it's a small university. They don't have very many programs. Their programs mostly consist of a program for business, health science, nursing. And so when a student goes to USU and they're a business student, they may need to be able to explain to the consular officer, why did you choose USU as opposed to another school that you could have gone to? And you need to be able to answer that question. And so in the case of USU, USU has students from a lot of very interesting companies that go to school there. USU's graduates get jobs at places like Facebook, Qualcomm, Microsoft, HCL, some top engineering and technology companies. They also have students who go and get jobs in the healthcare sector because of their strong ties to hospitals and nursing areas. So if you go to USU and you want to do a concentration in healthcare or in technology, you can. And that will prepare you to go and do something else. Well, you'd better be able to explain that to the consular officer. More often than not, a student comes up to the window and the consular officer says, why do you want to go to this school? And the student goes, I don't know. My parents or my agent are telling me it's a good school, but I don't know if it's a good school. To be perfectly honest, that's a terrible answer. A consular officer is out if that student is a bona fide student. A bona fide student, a real student, knows why they want to go to that school as opposed to some other school. So you need to know your story. Why do you want to go to that school? Another question that the consular officer will always ask is they'll say, what do you want to do when you finish your program of study? And if a student says, I want to stay and work in the United States, if you say you want to stay and work in the United States, you are now trying to be an immigrant, and you will be under Section 214B. And so the student needs to be able to articulate and explain to the consular officer how this degree will help them when they return to their home country. Recently, we had a student that got refused because they said in their interview they intended to stay and work in the United States after they graduated. The student was referring to their optional practical training. Students are allowed to stay in the U.S. and work for 1 year after graduation. But that, according to the U.S. law, is considered a part of their education. So if you tell the consular officer, I want to go work, and even though you're thinking of OPT, it doesn't matter. Because you said you wanted to stay and work, they will refuse you your visa. You really have to have a compelling reason to come back to your home country. The next bullet point is to smile. Be confident. Recently, the vice president of our international student recruiting visited the U.S. one of the U.S. consulates in India. There, they met with 3 of the visa officers as well as the visa section chief. And they said, what advice can we give students from India? And the advice they gave them was to tell them, know your stuff and be confident. Does that sound like our first 3 bullets? Know the school, know yourself, explain why it works, and be confident. Those 3 things are the most important things. So, the next bullet point, make eye contact, that's really important. It tells the consular officer if you really believe in what you're saying. So, when you make eye contact with someone, then they're looking right at you. Now, if a student goes in for the interview and they're looking around and they're looking side to side and they're very nervous, then the consular officer begins to wonder if they're telling them the truth. Because typically, it's hard for the average person to lie to your face. And they'll try to look away or look in another direction. And so anytime a student is looking at their shoes or looking around, looking anywhere except at the consular officer, it really brings up questions about whether that student is being honest or not. So make eye contact. The next point is answer all questions honestly and completely. This is really important. I'd like to share with you the 2 ways in which students lie and get in trouble the most. The first is when students say, the question is in regards to, do you have any family members living in the United States? Now, for a student, this would be a brother, a sister, or a parent. Now, a lot of times people who do have relatives in the U.S., they don't check that box. The problem is that your relatives living in the United States have already disclosed in their immigration application who their relatives are in India. So when you submit your visa application, the consular officer already knows that you have family living in the United States, usually. And so if you lie to them on your form, they'll know you're lying. And if they believe you're lying about that, they'll believe you're lying about everything. And they will refuse you your visa. So it's important that you're honest about that. If you have family living in the United States, that can actually help you in some instances to get your visa. Many students choose to live with family members while they're going to school. It lowers the cost of finishing their education. And so the amount of money you're required to show on the I-20 is actually less. But again, every student's case is different. So if you are planning on staying with family while in the United States, be honest about it and explain to the consular officer how it will save you some money. But also make sure that you're honest about your intent to return, to go back to the country that you're from. All right, the next thing that always messes people up about honesty is that they ask the student, did someone help you complete this form? So often, I would be refusing someone a visa when I was in the consular section, and they would say, wait a minute, but I didn't know that. I didn't fill the form out. Someone else did it for me. And I would look at the form and say, look, it says here that no one helped you fill it out. And they said, well, I didn't do that because I was told that if I filled it out, that then it would hurt me, that I wouldn't be able to get a visa. That's not true. The U.S. consulate knows that people who are applying for visas, they don't know U.S. law, and they're very scared. They know that lawyers, attorneys, and visa advisors, agents, like many of you on the call, they know that you help these students. So just put it on the form. If you are a good agent, putting your name on that form will actually help the student. So how can you become a good agent? Well, you become a good agent when you make sure that you only send qualified students to the embassy. And if you are aware of visa fraud, report it immediately to the embassy's consular section. You can reach the anti-fraud unit of the U.S. consulate or embassy by calling the embassy and asking to speak with diplomatic security. When you talk to the diplomatic security team, give them specific information. Give them the name, the birth date, and the passport number, if you have it, of the person who's committing visa fraud. Tell them, I'm an agent. Someone came into my office. They're trying to illegally immigrate to the United States to work for their uncle. They told me about that. I personally know it, and I wanted to warn you. I told them I wouldn't help them, and so I'm giving you their information. The more you help the embassy fight visa fraud by turning in people that you know are suspect, the more the embassy will trust you. And if they see that you helped an applicant with their visa, they'll have greater confidence that you're doing a good job screening qualified candidates to come, and you can actually help your students to be able to get a visa. All right. Question is, but won't the embassy see me as a person trying to pass as a migration officer? Only if that's what you're doing. The embassy knows that agents help students with visas almost 80% of the time. And yet, probably in less than 20% of the applications does the student say that the agent helped them. So the embassy is well aware that these students are working with agents. The bigger problem comes if there's a mistake on the form. So if there is a mistake on the application and it says that they had help from someone else filling it out, then the consular officer will make immediate changes and won't penalize the student for the problem. And so a consular officer will be more forgiving if a student had help from someone else than if the student signed the DS-165 saying that they didn't have help from anybody. All right. The next question, or the next point on this is, what do you do if you've been refused? So you did everything right. You came prepared for your interview. You knew the school that you wanted to go to. You were able to articulate information about the school, why that school was important to you. You had a great plan. You understood how that would help you get a job when you came back. You had sufficient funds to travel, and you were still refused. What do you do if you're refused? Well, there's a simple thing you can do that most people don't know. And that is, if you're ever refused for a visa, ask for a supervisory review. You need to do it immediately. So if I was a student at the window and the consular officer refused me and they were about to hand me my refusal letter, they need to step up and say, excuse me, sir or ma'am, excuse me, but I would like to request a supervisory review. Okay? So when you have that supervisory review, then you get a second chance at another interview. U.S. visa regulations require any of those student visa applicants that request a supervisor to review their case. The consular officer must stop the interview, go and get their supervisor, bring the supervisor over, and the supervisor will give you a second interview. The supervisor must give you an interview in a manner that is unbiased, meaning their decision cannot be based on the prior person's decision. So if you are refused, ask for a supervisory review. That way you'll get 2 chances to get your visa. Now, what do you do if the supervisor interviews you the second time and you're still refused? If the supervisor refuses you, tell the supervisor, could you please give me 3 specific reasons why my case doesn't meet the standard? Those words are very specific. It is the standard of 214B that you were probably rejected by. And so if you say, why was I rejected under 214B? Please give me 3 specific reasons why I didn't overcome the presumption of immigrant status, or why I'm assumed to be an immigrant. Give me 3 reasons that are very specific. Usually the supervisor will almost always give the student that specificity. And that can help you when you reapply. Because after you've been refused, when you reapply for your visa, you'll be asked to provide the consular office with new information that they didn't have at the time the interview was given. The only way 214B can be overcome is if they provide new information, and if that new information helps them to overcome the refusal. Consular officers, they're not trying to ruin your life or prevent a student from going to school. What they want to do is they want to help students to be able to live their dreams, and do so in a way that is compliant with U.S. law to protect the United States from illegal immigrants or other people who would want to harm the United States. So that is that's a little bit more about this. Now, we are almost done. I'd like to open up some time now for questions. I can see people asking questions about a student being rejected because of not enough funds. And I just refer back to what we said before. You have to have sufficient funds to show 1 year of study plus either income or savings for the subsequent years. And Miyake says, students with an agricultural background have been refused, saying they don't have enough funds, even if they have a strong education background. Each student case is different. What students have to do is be able to go in and establish not only that they have enough funds, but they have to be able to explain why they want to go study in the United States. Mihak, if I were to guess, your students are being refused because they don't have a lot of confidence when they go to the visa window, and so they're not able to articulate, explain, and defend why they want to go to that university and how earning a degree at that university will help them when they return to India. That's the #1 reason these students that they don't get a visa. If a student wants to study for 4 months and wants to take her daughter, how can she present a strong application even if she is a single mom? Well, it really just boils down to money. There's nothing that says a single mother with a child cannot go study in the United States. In fact, if the mother has a custody agreement that requires her to bring the child back to India, that's a good reason to overcome 214B, especially if they only temporarily can leave the country with a child. But it's just important that they be able to show that they have the financial means to go study in the U.S. and that whatever they're studying, it makes sense with their life so that they can return to continue to work in their home country, not work in the United States. 80% of students with an agricultural background have been refused. Mihak, all I can tell you is that it really goes to the family's income every year and the amount of savings. An agricultural background, it's not that hurts a student per se. It really is just that the student can't establish why they would come back to India. Somebody could say, why would you come back to India and work on your family farm? Why wouldn't you just stay in the United States and work? They have to be able to explain how that degree will help them to come back to India. Vishnu, it's from Makarand Ramdas. And I hope I said your name correctly. Can you provide a list of reasons for rejection under 214B? I can't, because the reasons are too many. What you have to understand about 214B is legally, when a student walks in and applies for a visa, the consular officer is legally obligated. They must assume that student intends to immigrate to the United States. The burden is on the student to prove that they are not trying to immigrate to the United States. And so there's no list of reasons. However, there is a list of reasons why you overcome 214B. And the reasons you overcome 214B is that you show that you have a compelling reason to come back to your home country after finishing your studies in the United States. And that could be strong family ties, strong economic ties, a job, many reasons. All right, the next question. Students with less family income and enough funds to support his studies for more than 2 years, will that be accepted? It really depends, Amandeep. It really depends. If you're going for a 2-year program of study and you have enough money for 2 years, that's not an issue. If you want to do a 4-year program of study and you only have enough money for 2 years, well, the family has to have enough income that you reasonably believe they can pay for the other years. So, money is always a tricky thing. Mihak, a student's family petition has been filed, was being refused, saying that they're not eligible. When you say the family petition was filed, if the family is applying for an immigrant visa, well then yes, they would not be eligible for a non-immigrant visa. Anyone who has applied for an immigrant visa, they're trying to immigrate. And so there's a little bit of a problem. I have seen where a student whose family, they won the visa lottery and they're in the process of getting their applications approved. The student applied to go study in the US and we had to refuse that student. That student intended to immigrate. And so we told them, you have to finish your immigration status, and once you do, then you can go study in the US. It took the student a little bit longer because the immigrant visa requires additional processing, but eventually they were able to get to the United States. So if a student has illegal parents or brothers in the States, but they're not willing to stay illegally, just want to study and go back, how can you make a stronger point? I'll be honest with you, Vishnu. It's Paula. Paula, if you have a parent or sibling that illegally immigrated to the United States, it's going to be hard because your family has already demonstrated that they are going to flaunt U.S. law and come to the U.S. illegally. And so it is believed then by the consular officer that you present a very high risk. I will say this, that overcoming that is not impossible. You just have to be able to explain to them why you didn't immigrate to the U.S. illegally. Why did you continue to stay in your home country? And why you continue to want to stay in your home country and come back after graduation. If you can explain that, and if you can explain that to the satisfaction of the consular officer, then you'll be okay. But I'm not going to lie to you, that's a pretty tough thing to do. Okay, Vishnu, most of the time the visa officer denies the visa and the student's not even given a chance to talk. Look, Vishnu, if the student was never given the opportunity to talk, that's why the student needs to ask for a supervisory review. If someone walks up to the window and the consular officer says, no, refusal, and they hand you a letter and they never asked you a single question, that's inappropriate. Ask for the supervisor. The supervisor will come and give them an interview. And so if they don't even give them a chance to talk, again, ask for the supervisor, get a second opinion. Can you apply for a student visa with a dependent? Yes, you can. And so when you apply for your F1 student visa, you'll have to also get what's called an F2. And so make sure you report to your school that you're bringing a dependent. And then when you go to get your student visa, you fill out a form for yourself and your dependent. Because you have a dependent, it means you're going to have to show money for your program of study to support yourself and this other, your dependent. But student visas get issued for people with taking dependents with them all the time. If a student went illegally to the States as a child or a minor and now they want to go study in the U.S., what do they do? Especially what happens if they were deported. This was a really common problem in Korea. So a lot of Korean parents would send kids on a tourist visa to visit relatives in Los Angeles or other parts of the United States. Usually Los Angeles. and the student would go to Los Angeles, and I say Los Angeles because Los Angeles has a large public school system. And while the student was there with their relatives, they would attend public school. Los Angeles public schools will allow a student to enroll even if they're not a legal immigrant. And so the students would be attending U.S. public school. They would get caught, and they would sometimes get deported. When they got caught and deported for studying illegally in the United States, that creates a real black spot for the student. However, there is hope. The U.S. consulate, the visa officer, they realize that you were a kid and you did what your parents told you to do. So when you become an adult and you're over 18, they'll give you a second chance. Just be honest on the form. Let them know you were deported before for studying in the U.S. illegally. And then explain your case. Tell them why you're not trying to do that now, that you're not trying to go to the U.S. and attend school illegally. And explain to them why you want to go to the school and why that school is good for you. Consular officers usually don't hold it against a minor child if their parents made them do something when they were a kid. However, after you're 18, your actions are your own. And so if beyond the age of 18 you do something like that, there will be no such forgiveness. And so again, they understand that you may have been deported as a child. You can always reapply and just make your case and be honest. The student has to ask the visa officer for supervisory review. That is correct, Miha. The student has to immediately tell the consular officer, I would like a supervisory review. And they need to do it right there at the window. All right, recently a student was not given a supervisory review and was said to fill out an application online. Boy, ooh, if that interviewing officer did not give them a supervisory review and was told to reapply online, then the interviewing officer actually broke the law. When the student applies online, they need to include a letter that says, at the time that I applied, I asked for a supervisory review and I was not given one. And make that very clear in your reapplication. In Korea, when a student reapplies online, they're asked to submit a letter. In that letter, you need to say, you know, what's different, or what did the consular officer not know at the time of the visa interview. Boy, that's serious business if you don't get a supervisory review and you ask for one. That's the kind of thing that can get a vice consul in a lot of trouble. They really can't do that. Yeah, they have to give you a supervisory review. Okay, any other questions? Keep quiet, no other questions? Here we go. A student wanted to stay 2 weeks at a language school, applied for a tourist visa, was asked to bring an I-20. Yeah, it doesn't matter how long you're studying. If the place that you're studying, if you're going to be studying for more than, I want to say it's 15 hours a week, there's a certain number of classroom hours that you can't exceed. And also if you receive a certificate. So, you know, if you have a certain number of classroom hours, or if at the completion of the program you get a completion certificate or diploma, then you must have an I-20. You can only study on a B1 or B1, B2 visa if it's study incidental to tourism or study incidental to something else. And there are a lot of these language tours now. And the language tours, you can go and study, if you will, for short periods of time with the. What that really means is that the majority of your time is tourism, and that you're only going to be spending part of the time studying, and it won't meet the requirement, and there's no certificate or diploma. Okay, yet a student at a sponsor from the USA that would consider he has relatives in the U.S. and has an intention to stay. Yeah, Amandeep, having a U.S. sponsor could indicate that you intend to immigrate. It could also indicate that it will be cheaper for you to study when you're in the United States because you have someone who's there to help you, right? You have to explain, and the student has to be prepared to explain why they're not going to stay in the United States. If they have a sponsor that lives in the United States, that's fine. I issued many visas to students who had US sponsors. The question I always had for them is, look, if you have family or relatives living in the US, why not stay? And I had many students look me right in the eye and say, I'm not going to stay with my aunt and uncle. My parents live in India. I want to live in India. If I get a degree in computer science from Newbury College, Newbury, by the way, is one of our consortium schools. They have a fantastic computer science program. And I'm just going to say, if you want to study computer science, you should probably be applying to Newbury. But you got to look that guy in the eye and say, after I get my degree in computer science from Newbury, I can come back to India and I can make 10 times more money than I'm making right now. And I can help my parents. I will not abandon them. I'm going to come back to India or wherever you live. So you really have to be able to explain why that degree means you're coming back home. If you can't explain that, then you shouldn't go. All right. There's a lot of rumors that if an applicant got a refusal in Kazakhstan, if you apply in a European country, you'll have more chances. Is that true? The country where you're reapplying, you could get, we always heard these rumors too. The reality is that your best chance to get a visa is in the country where you live. And so wherever you're living and have residency, that's where you need to apply. If you go to a country that you do not live in and you apply for a visa, the probability of you getting that visa is actually lower. Now, let's say you got refused in Kazakhstan and then you went and applied in London. When you apply in London, the consular officer will know that you got refused in Kazakhstan. You know, I mean, the US government has a lot of information, right? And they share it, and they do a very good job of sharing it. So when you go up to the window, you see the guy working on the computer, he's looking at that background, and he's going to see that you were just refused in Kazakhstan. Now, a visa officer in London doesn't know Kazakhstan very well. And they're going to say, look, if someone in Kazakhstan who knows Kazakhstan very well thinks that this person is never going to go back to Kazakhstan, then why do I think he's going to go to Kazakhstan? And you are more likely to be refused. So no, it doesn't help you to go to a different country. In fact, it hurts you. Yeah, it's the opposite. It hurts. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay. Student mentoring, that you'll be opting for CPT and OPT. Will that hurt them, right? Well, if you're doing a program that has CPT, it says that on your I-20, okay? And so, I mean, OPT, everybody knows about OPT. You don't have to speak about OPT. I would never speak about OPT specifically in a visa interview, because OPT, if you talk about working, it's just going to confuse the consular officer. They're going to think that you care more about the OPT than you do the education. With CPT, because the I-20 says CPT is approved for the program of study, you will be expected to work as a part of your studies, but that work is a part of your studies. And so even though CPT and OPT are working at a company, you need to think about it as far as the applicant goes as a part of the education, because the consular officer thinks of CPT and OPT as a part of your education. And so when, CPT and OPT are just extensions of your education. So if you're doing CPT or OPT, honestly, I wouldn't even bring it up in your interview. That's a part of your educational program of study, and it shouldn't be the main reason you're going to the United States. The student is in TE starts on a student visa, is applied for 12 months program. The visa is for a year, and also the I-20, more classes a month. Okay, what happens if a student has a student visa that's good for 12 months and they decide when they get to the United States that they're going to stay longer? That's easy. the school will issue them another I-20 for the program of study, and they can renew their visa with the school directly through the INS. Typically, it's a mail-in process, and it's very straightforward. So don't worry, if your visa runs out and you want to continue to stay and study, you can just, it's called a change of status request. You make a change of status request to the Immigration and Naturalization Service, the INS in the US. They will process that. It's usually done without an interview. You just complete an application, explain what you're going to be doing or why you're staying, and they'll send you back the visa. Okay. Well, I want to thank everybody for coming out today for our seminar. It's been really great. I hope that this has been really helpful for you. And if I could just make another, just another plug for our schools. We have wonderful universities. If you are not an agent working with us, we would love to work with you. We work with all ISEF agents and people who are ACRI certified agents. Please reach out to Emma Morris or myself. We'd love to have you join us, and we'd love to have your students. Thank you so much. Have a fantastic day, and remember to tell your students to know their story. Bye-bye.